What's going on YouTube, Qihoo right here. So in today's video we talk about a new vulnerability that has been released for iOS 12.1.3 and 12.1.4, and we're going to also discuss about 12.2 briefly and what to expect in terms of jailbreaking. So just a few hours ago, security researcher maldiohead posted, quote, "Here's the PoC or proof of concept CVE 2019-6207 kernel heap info leak, which can trigger in macOS and iOS sandbox. I will update more details about the vulnerability. Enjoy it." And then of course he posted more details. So if you go ahead here on the GitHub page, you have the vulnerability code and of course some information about the vulnerability itself. Now in order to understand what this is, we have to understand what is a heap. Any program in C has a heap and a stack. Now if you did any sort of computer science in school, you probably know that the heap and the stack are very important components of any program, and that the heap is basically used for storing data that the program doesn't know ahead of time. For example, if you have a program that takes the name and the age and the sex and other things from the user, for example in a form, that program doesn't know how much you're going to input in there. Your name might be like 25 characters long, but for example if you have a comment section for some additional information, you might fill in there a lot of things. So the program doesn't exactly know the length of the data, so it's going to have to allocate it in a memory that is dynamic and that can fit it, and that is basically the heap. It's a dynamically allocated memory which the program has, so naturally the iOS kernel also has a heap. Now the bug itself is a kernel bug, and of course it has been posted in the security contents of the iOS 12.2, so back in March, and if you search for it, it's present in here. It's been discovered by Weibo Wang of Qihoo 360 team, and of course by Stefan Ezer of Antidote. And it says in here, quote, "A malicious application may be able to determine kernel memory layout." Now, can we use this for a jailbreak? Well, yes and no. This is not TFP0 or kernel task port. This is not even remote code execution or executing code with kernel privileges and stuff like that. It's just a simple bug that allows you to determine some memory layout, and of course it allows you to get some information from the kernel itself. Now if you open the vulnerability code in here, you can see that the code itself is pretty short. So not a lot going on in here. You can just show the address of a buffer and the length, and that's basically it, and you can show the leaked data. So while it's interesting because normally you wouldn't be able to get any information at all from the kernel, there should definitely be a protection barrier between you and the kernel, especially since you're sandboxed. It's still not enough in order to create a jailbreak. So I had a lot of questions from people on Twitter and other medias about this vulnerability in here, and they asked me whether this can be used for a jailbreak and stuff like that, and that's why I made this video. But no, unfortunately this alone cannot create a jailbreak because, as I said, this is not TFP0, so we cannot control the kernel right as we want. Now this is still important, and this is still very interesting, especially since normally you shouldn't be able to read anything from the kernel, let alone parts of the heap, but of course it's not exactly all we need. And there is another problem to this. As you can see, it's part of the iOS 12.2 security content, which means that it's been patched on iOS 12.2. So the iOS 12.2 doesn't have this vulnerability whatsoever. Now I'm not sure why the security researcher maldiohead posted it only now, because it's been a while since it's been discovered, but it's not compatible with 12.2. Speaking of which, there are going to be some vulnerabilities from Ned of Google Project 0, but these do not contain TFP0 either. Quote, "2 more XNU iOS netstack bugs fixed in iOS 12.3. Write-ups and PoCs coming next week. No TFP0 from this." So while the iOS 12.2 will also receive some important kernel vulnerabilities, unfortunately none of this will be TFP0, so without TFP0 there's not much we can do. Another question I get a lot is, can we use any of these vulnerabilities in here for a nonce setter in order to be able to downgrade? Unfortunately no, a nonce setter uses a TFP0 bug in order to be able to write to the NVRAM, because you have to unlock it first, and you do that by patching the kernel. So it's unfortunate, but we cannot use this for downgrades either. While it might be usable for a jailbreak in other contexts, for example an info leak and stuff like that, it's still not enough, and once you have TFP0 you wouldn't need it anyways. So I really hope that this video clarifies the things with this kernel heap info leak and what we can do with it, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated. I'm Qihoo, and until the next time, peace out.